Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to the second webinar in our series of highlighting topics of interest according to our customers and partners. This webinar is titled Leveraging New Technologies with Migration. My name is Danny and I'll be assisting Stefan and Henning today in the webinar. First up, a bit of housekeeping. Your phone line and your computer mics will be muted, but of course we do encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar in the question panel of GoToWebinar. We do have time allocated at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. And finally, today's presentation will be recorded and will also be sent to all the registrants and shared on our webinar page on our website. Now, before handing it over to Stefan, I'll quickly go through today's agenda. Stefan will be introducing panagenda very quickly, identify the business value of your existing infrastructure and how to do so. It will then be handed over to Henning, who will speak about how to identify dependencies. Back to Stefan on how to execute, including some implementation examples. And finally, Henning will conclude this webinar, after which we will have, as I said, time for question and answers. So with that, I'll hand it over to Stefan now.
Thank you, Danny, for the quick introduction. Hello, everybody. So my name is Stefan, and I'm senior consultant as well, product manager here at panagenda. So just to introduce you quickly about what panagenda is doing. So we are focusing heavily on the IBM ICS stack in analyzing and optimizing collaboration landscapes. We have a bunch of licenses out there where we have done a lot of analysis so far. So reaching more than 1 million database designs, for instance, is one of those core numbers. And we are, we have multiple branches across the globe. Our head office is in Austria, here in Vienna. And we have branch in America as well, Germany and the Netherlands. And if you have any further questions, what panagenda does more or less, of course, you can contact us at any point in time. Right, so today's topic is about leveraging new technologies in the migration, migration stuff. The first category of the whole topic is how to identify, for instance, the business value out of your existing infrastructure, which is pretty important, right? So whenever you plan to perform a migration or to do a kind of transition, then one of the first things you should be aware of is that you are doing or that you are executing more or less a change process. So it's not about the technology, what you want to migrate from A to B. It's more or less the whole methodology behind of a change process. So, and this is one of the core sentences which I want to put here up front into today's presentation, because it's pretty essential. You need to be aware of that the change process is a huge process and depends on the organization, of course. And those 4 bullet points, what you see here on this slide, is are just 4 bullet points out of many bullet points, which usually appear during a change process of whatever topic. Specifying and define all your improvement goals is one of the essential things, for instance, in the area what we are targeting here, for instance. So defining what kind of things I want to improve at the end of the day is one of the things where you need to write down the goal at the end of the day. To have, of course, a solid business case is one of the vital stuff you need to have in place. I mean, to do a migration without having a business case is more or less useless or senseless. So having a business case where you see from a cost point of view some advantages, as well from a productivity point of view or business value point of view. This is pretty vital from a business case point of view. Of course, planning the change is very, very important, and you can plan only the whole migration transition change only if you know your environment before you start the whole stuff, right? So you need to understand your existing environment. You need to understand how my end users are currently using my environment. So to specify and to plan the whole change is pretty important and should be based on facts only and not just on guessing. So facts are pretty important when we talk about migration transition. because without having the facts, you can start a migration. The migration can completely fail because your assumptions were completely wrong or maybe right. So maybe the whole migration was at the end of the day maybe successful. But if you have them already as facts collected, as business facts collected, it will help you throughout the whole migration transition process. So change process is one of the core elements. So when we deep dive a little bit in the area where we see migrations stuff from a Notes client and Domino client, Domino server point of view, then of course we split them usually into two sections. So we have the Notes client and the PIM functionality area. So analyzing what kind of clients do I have at the moment in my client infrastructure, what kind of versions, what kind of local archives, encryption stuff. So all the things what the end user is currently using on the client level. And as a second category, of course, all the Domino applications I have currently up and running in my Domino landscape. Plus, if you have additional third-party, well, not third-party product, but additional products such as IBM Connections, then you need to understand also, or you need to assess also this kind of environment from a usage point of view. So who is using what, when is which application used, or even to what extent the adoption level is currently in my environment. So for instance, in the IBM Connections world, you have for sure some sort of adoption level from the end user point of view. And if you migrate them to a Google world or to the Microsoft world, then of course one of the aims should be that you have the same level of adoption after the migration. Because if you have less than the current adoption level is, then yeah, the migration is at the end of the day not really successful. So those are just a couple of bullet points in those two categories, and where we as panagenda can help, yeah, clearly in this whole stuff where we collect information out of your infrastructure, and based on this information we perform our analytics stuff or our analytics magic, and we use this then for creating and helping you as a customer in executing or creating the plan, and then at the end of the day to execute the plan. So analytics is one of the core elements in order to get facts out of your environment. So if I just start quickly with the Notes client and PIM stuff, this is the area where we perform a full Notes client assessment. And here, those are just a couple of bullet points. It's by far not all the areas which you usually should assess, but if you know what kind of things are currently used and what kind of data end users are using, for instance, out there, that's pretty much essential for the whole migration stuff, because you should understand, do my users have local archive, for instance? If yes, what to do? I mean, I need to plan all the things in order to have them as a part or as a piece element in my migration plan or migration phase. So to know all the bits and pieces, like it's mentioned here in that slide, is pretty important in order to make a clear plan throughout the whole migration stuff. And of course, representing the business value at the moment, so status quo, for instance, the business value may come from utilizing instant messaging of same time in the Notes client, or by using local replicas, because my end users are heavily relying on the offline capability the Notes client is giving to end users. So those are business values, the current business values for an organization. And you should be aware of how this kind of business value can be transitioned to the new platform. So these these kind of bullet points more or less representing important elements for a migration phase. And of course, the last part, less dependencies. So a business value can come from the area that my applications have less dependencies with each other. But in order to identify those dependencies, you need to analyze them, right? So this is also one of the things where business value is coming from. Right. Just to give you a couple of examples, when we deep dive a little bit the client world, as said, identifying local archives or identifying encryption on the database level are important, or to decide what to do or what to tell the user if I decide from a central point of view that I don't want to deal with all these local applications, right, and to leave it up to the end user. You need to be prepared that the end user may speak up and say, hey, okay, I'm now in the new cloud world, but I was using these local databases and local archives. So what to do with that? And you need to be aware of, or at least you have the awareness, or should have the awareness, to give a proper answer to your end user. And if you can handle them upfront throughout your planning phase of your migration, yeah, you can save a lot of time at the end of the day, and also you avoid also a lot of issues throughout this whole change process. As said, those are a couple of bullet points, identifying applications my end users are using, identifying if end users are maybe using other applications inside of the Notes client. So maybe a department is utilizing heavily a certain plugin, and I was not completely aware of the fact that they are using that. This is part of the assessment on the Notes client world, and this is one of the things we heavily recommend and suggest that this should be part of the migration, to analyze my Notes client infrastructure first, and to include this kind of output and fact-based information then for migration. Giving you other examples, such as analyzing delegated mail files. So to steer my whole onboarding process, to identify user groups, to identify which user is accessing other mail databases, because they are using other mail databases on a regular basis, for instance. So I can, based on this information, I can steer my whole process. And if I know them upfront, it's a perfect win event for the whole migration. And last but not least in this list, which groups are being used to address emails. So in order to inject all the existing groups I have at the moment in my public address book, in order to avoid injecting all of them, I can analyze upfront which groups are really used at the moment, and which are currently used, and which I should inject into my Microsoft Active Directory in order to get them available in the Azure AD. So analyzing them first helps you again throughout this migration phase. From a Domino Applications point of view, we see it from a different angle, that you should analyze your server infrastructure plus applications, right? So identifying which applications really used, from which department, or even from which geographical location, in order to minimize the amount of databases I have to deal with, in the sense of, should I migrate this application to a SharePoint platform or to whatever platform? So to identify for which applications I should invest more time and effort. And such an analysis could look like this, for instance, done by our IDNA Foundation report, where we clearly identify the usage of certain applications. So all the applications which have which were accessed by more than, let's say, 100 users, are maybe more critical for my organization versus an application which was just accessed by one user. So clearly, having a visual picture is helping me again in steering this whole project. To classify also how my end users accessing those applications can also help me if I have a demand to webify, for instance, applications. So here, for instance, is just an example to see how many of all my application sessions, for instance, on the left-hand side in this red column, how many of all the Notes client sessions against applications are coming from a Notes client versus a web browser. And if I know that, let's say, 100% of all the sessions are just coming from the Notes client, then I know that nobody is using really applications in the web browser, because they are not really webified, or they are not available in the browser, right? So seeing how my end users are accessing which application category can help you again in the steering process. And just to draw this kind of picture to a different angle, identifying on the application level how an application is being accessed is, for instance, this picture showing to see that, for instance, this blue bubble, it's a system application which is just purely used throughout the web access, because it's the redirect database, and therefore it's just classified that all the events, all the sessions against this database are just coming from the web browser, of course. So this kind of pictures help you in identifying all the usage information from a client. Right, and if you enrich this whole information with geographical information as well, department information, then you can drill down into all these bits and pieces. And for instance, to identify application owners, to identify which department is accessing which applications, or are there any cross-border access stuff being done. So for instance, that users from China are accessing applications in Spain, for instance. So you can identify all this kind of stuff if you enrich this data with organizational and geographical information. And just to give you one other example here, this is the usage, for instance, all the applications which were used by or accessed by at least one person throughout the analysis time frame. We can segment out here to visualize you here different kind of things to see from which client type the user is coming from which geographical location department, as well to show me only, for instance, all the applications which have been accessed by more than 200 users, and to focus only on those applications only, right? Because all the other applications which have been just hit by a single user, I can completely ignore for the moment because I'm anyway completely busy with the whole migration stuff. So therefore I just focus on the most used applications. Right, so this is, for instance, this picture. And if you, again, enrich this with the geographical information, then you can even say, okay, which applications have been accessed by the finance department, and from which geographical locations all the people from the finance department are coming from, right? So plenty of people from China, some from Germany. So you know exactly from the map point of view which users are involved here in the usage activity. And of course, pretty important, if you want to migrate users based on groups, then you need to have this information available. Otherwise, you cannot steer the group migration, for instance. So segmentation here is pretty critical. And to round this a little bit up, with bandwidth analysis is an additional item which is often very important. So for instance, if you have a decentralized environment at the moment where you have different kind of node servers locally deployed, and those local node servers or Domino servers will become obsolete because you know that every user will go to the via the internet pipe to the cloud service, then you know what kind of bandwidth requirement you would need to have at the end of the day to deliver a cloud service to your end user. And this is just one picture out of many to calculate and to measure bandwidth consumption at the moment, right? And last but not least, mail usage. I always say that for an end user, if you switch from a Notes platform, for instance, to a Microsoft platform, the end user, the usage behavior, for instance, will not change at all, right? The user will still use the Outlook client for emailing stuff, and he will still send an email to 100 recipient with a 1 megabyte attachment, for instance. And to clearly identify upfront what is my usage behavior for my end user will help me to identify also issues in my future environment, for instance, or to identify possible issues in my future environment, because as said, the usage behavior of my end users will not change with the platform change. The last slide here for identifying business value is the adoption stuff, and this is just a very quick information and a quick sidestep. Knowing what kind of adoption level your organization has with the technology you currently use is a fact-based information which you should map with the future technology, and to analyze also the adoption level. For instance, whenever you have done the migration. So if you migrate tomorrow and all the people are then migrated to the cloud platform, then you should measure the adoption level, for instance, 2, 3, 4 months afterwards, and to compare the results with the adoption level you had before, right? And only if the adoption level is better compared to the old way, then you can say that the adoption for your end users is much better compared to the old system, right? So adoption or utilizing adoption information is pretty important as well from our point of view. And this brings me to the category of identifying dependencies, where I just hand over to Henning.
Thank you, Stefan, and hello everybody. This is Henning Kunz speaking, and as you saw in the intro from Danny Klaas, I'm one of the services guys within Panagenda. So I'm doing consulting in the fields of migrations and analytics of collaborational infrastructures all throughout the year. So let's do a small full stop. Stefan already told you a lot about what's going on, what are points of interest if you try to get insights into your infrastructure, which existing infrastructure, the client space, the application space, what are measures or hints to identify business value out of the existing infrastructure, and what is how to transport them to the new system or transform them to a new system. So maybe Stefan already told it or said that this is a talk about a huge change project, and maybe I shed some light on it too, because from my point of view, it's a change project in three perspectives. First, most of the time we are not talking about a target infrastructure. Most of the time we are talking about moving away from a Notes Domino infrastructure towards a cloud-based infrastructure, which maybe is Office 365 by Microsoft. So then we have a change in the operations model because you're going cloud, and your staff is not driving their own or operating their own systems. They are communicating with the service operators on the Microsoft side. Secondly, of course, it's a new technical platform, so you have to do new integrations, you have to migrate stuff, and this is a lot of technical hurdles to go there. And then, of course, and that should be matching the goal that this is a huge cultural change for your company, because most of the time, one of the goals is not just getting rid of a specific technology, is more using a new functionality or new functional stack to change collaboration inside the company. So you will go new ways to collaborate. So this is a threefold change in the organization. Up to now, we were searching for business value and measures for business value with our analytical toolset in terms of usage, organizational, geographical, and insights into your client landscape. Technical hurdles like encryption and archives. I'd like to add a dimension to the mix, which is in applications, in your existing applications, Domino-based applications, besides usage, org, and geo, and this is design. So the next step is taking a look into the code base. Design not from the look and feel, design from the code, the code underneath the applications. So, and I'd like to show you just some pictures to get an idea what we mean with that. Let's start with getting an idea what's in the mix. So, what is your current footprint of the collaboration landscape? So, which applications do you have? If you take a look at this very flashy dashboard, we see on the upper left that this is an environment which has about 5,000 databases, and I'm talking about NSF instances. So if you go a bit on the right, you already see that it's reduced by a factor of 10, because out of the 5,000 databases, we or our appliance or analytics tool investigated that there is 500 applications which are interesting in the sense of, let's take a look at the functionality in design, because this is representing the collaborative applications in your environment. Then on the far right, you already get some very helicopterish view to the complexity or the impact of your applications. Means starting from exceptional, you see 4 until the gray insignificant. So this gives you an impression on how many of your applications are very complex or half complex or more content driven to get a first grip on what's in the mix. Then we could go down and take a look at the code base. So we investigate all applications. We cut down the applications into small bits and pieces, and the smallest piece is a line of code, and the line of code comes from a code block, and the code block is part of a design element, and that's what you usually know. You're coming from views, forms, agents, subforms, or whatever. So the blue columns are the sheer count of those design elements in your code base, and the reddish columns are the lines of code represented by these design elements. And you see already that we distinguish between different coding languages, so Formula and Lotus Script, Java, JavaScript. So that's, again, a helicopter overview to what's in the mix. So we are investigating 8 million lines of code, and they are distributed mostly via views, forms, and agents. So drilling down a bit to get knowledge about more knowledge about the code base is we already know, or we could investigate which applications are similar. So which are inheriting from which. So as an example, on the left-hand side, you see 193 database clusters where there is a lot of clusters having just one database in it. You see that on the left-hand side. And if you take a look at the red bubble, this is representing a cluster of 10 databases where the similarity is up to 99.4%. And that means that 99.4% of the code lines inside these 10 databases is identical. So, and then there is some inheritance. If you take a look in the middle, in this box, we have 5 databases. So each bubble represents a cluster which has identical design. And then you see on the lines that the below, so the 2 databases on the bottom have 99.56% similarity to the upper one, and the 5 databases I picked are shown on the right-hand side. So we know which databases belong together, even if there's no template information available in the database itself. We just find it by similarity of the design. And this gives you hints of, oh, now maybe you don't have 500 problems. You remember we had 500 focus databases. We are talking about 193 database clusters representing 193 designs, because the bubbles are almost the same in design. Drilling further down, if we already know, or if you do some migration projects and you do think about porting applications from the Notes Domino stack to somewhere else, then we know already some, let's call it specifics inside codes, or which are interesting. So we have a different sets of findings we automatically get out of the code base, and which is in this special case specific code findings like hard-coded email addresses, Java imports, string conversions. So we have about 100 findings which we find, which we know, and we could give it to you automatically via the analytics. But furthermore, we are able to say, okay, we are searching for specifics which are specific for a customer, because you did your own code, you have your own workflow libraries, you have whatever, or you were using extensively external libraries, or you were using extensively interfaces to other legacy systems. And this is just an idea to give you the catalog, or the whole investigation on the databases would show you this is a database called Agent Repository. You would, on the left-hand side, you would see all the specifics, so you could navigate to a specific finding, like which Lotus Script extensions have been used, and then you could click to it and you see the code fragment. So this is a very simple agent, a header showing a use LSX Java con, and if you are in that element, you're already in a piece of code, then you could even open up this element in the Domino Designer and work on it. So this is not to cut the big elephant into pieces and find a way to migrate. This is more than the very detailed information for a developer who wants to remediate or to reinvent a database and needs access to the code pieces. That's the idea of our investigation or analytics tools to get information about applications code. And now we intersect the 2 dimensions usage, which you saw before, in Designinfo, which we got out of the code base investigation. And let me just shortly explain this picture. What you see is intersection between usage and designer info. So the red bubbles are applications. The golden bubbles, there are some in the top, are mail-in databases. Each bubble represents an application. The diameter of the bubble represents the number of users who accessed the application. And the X and Y axis means on the top are the complex applications and on the right are the heavy used applications. So as always, you have the most used, most complex, most user have touched the application on the upper right corner. So if you start focusing on applications, start thinking of which applications are really worthy, like from the business perspective or technically easy to start with, then you would go lower down and find the big bubbles there on the right-hand side. So that's just to help you find your way through this migration project. And of course, to each bubble, you get some insights. And if you click on the bubble, or if you want to have more information about specific application, then you have all the stuff we investigated, like usage, like the complexity, like the similarity, and in that specific example, you see the usage by organizational units. So that's most of the time useful, because if you go back in this picture, think of, we would like to start with the easy applications, and we want to have all the applications having just content used by the sales team. I'd like to move that first to the new platform, like be it SharePoint, so that it could use it on the tablet or whatever. So that helps you segment and find your way through such a transformation project. So I think that's it for the moment. I hand back to Stefan.
Okay, thank you, Henning. Right, so the next chapter is how to execute, for instance, what I have analyzed so far, so that I can dig all this fact-based information and to execute my migration plan. And we just want to give you a couple of examples, and those examples is, for instance, visualized here in a kind of timeline phase. So for instance, you should of course investigate a lot of time before you start the migration, so collect as much information as possible is very essential, because if you have a lot of information available and you analyze this information, then this helps you throughout the whole migration. If you have no or even less information available, then this could have an impact, of course, for the success of the migration stuff. And this is just a simple picture, seeing the activity and usage and even the mail behavior before the migration and also during the migration phase, and how it should be usually whenever the migration has been done from a mailing and calendaring point of view. Then usually you should not see any mail sending activities right in your environment. If you still see some mail activities, then this is of course, or it's maybe an indication that you missed an element throughout your migration project, right? Or if you still see activity on mail databases and you know that you have migrated all your 10,000 mail databases already to the cloud, then this is something what you need to investigate afterwards. And this is exactly why we see always this whole activity and usage information from a timeline point of view, that you should start very early in the whole migration process and to leave it up and running at least to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months after you have done the migration, just to identify if there are still any things happening in my environment which shouldn't happen any longer. To give you just a couple of examples from our portfolio set. So as you may know, we have Marvel Client in our portfolio, which can completely automate things on the Notes client level. So with Marvel Client Automate, for instance, you have the possibility to fully automate or get rid of all the applications which you have sunset, right? So you got rid of those applications on the Domino server, and you want to make sure that those applications disappear from the Notes client level, or even to remove the mail database for the end user, because the end user should not have the chance any longer to open up his mail database in order to send emails. You can do that all with, for instance, Marvel Client or Marvel Client Automate, if you like. So automatical reconfiguration of your Notes client infrastructure is pretty important. And just to give you one simple example, same time community. So if you end users, or if your end users are using Skype for Business, for instance, then your end user, which may still have the Notes client available, because the Notes client is still the gateway for all the Domino applications which are not really accessible via the web browser, then you need to make sure that the user has no possibility to use same time. I mean, maybe you have switched off the same time server, then of course you will not be able to use same time. But anyway, just to get rid of configuration elements of the Notes client is pretty essential, because you just make sure and you steer it at the end of the day to give the user only the things which the user should have after you have done the migration. And to give you one other example with the browser plugin stuff, using or upgrading the clients in the direction from a Notes client base to the ICAA is, for instance, also one of the examples which we usually do in a migration project. And when I go one step further to analyze the user mailbox in my analysis phase of before I really start the migration stuff, then usually I should identify things from a user mailbox point of view. So do I have any hidden folders, for instance, in my end user mailboxes? What to do, or how to identify, or how many encrypted emails I have in my user mailbox? So clearly a lot of things which you usually should make sure before you migrate the Notes database of an end user to whatever target system, right? So those are essential elements, for instance. And yeah, last but not least, for instance, performing backup stuff so that local databases are not being lost, even if you just uninstall or deinstall the Notes client. So there are just simple examples, or some of them are pretty simple, but pretty important, because you need to have answers ready for your end users, right? And yeah, those are a couple of examples, for instance. And one of the last slide here in the example section is again from Henning, so I will just hand over back quickly to Henning for that usage and design apps example.
Thanks, Stefan. So last time, I just want to point out that, of course, all the analytics tools are just giving insights into your application infrastructure and the usage stuff. But how about specific questions? So you would like to get rid of applications or cut down the number of applications you have to move. So we could just give you a list of applications not used in the last time period. Or we could give you a list of applications at least used by X users. So at least 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 users. So to focus. We could tell you which applications have been used in read mode only, or mostly in read mode from a specific set of users in a specific time frame. So we could, of course, make cuts into those dimensions. That might be idea is these are the simple applications which could be verified first, or content migrated with a tool. Or a list of applications which is mostly used in read mode without high complexity. So maybe this is a candidate to be archived. It must not be a different technical stack. It might be a PF archive, because it's just read, it's just content. A list of applications which deal with mail send, encryption, and signature, because they will have to be remediated before you cut out the mail and calendaring and put it to Outlook Exchange. Or a list of applications using mail front-end components. Why is this interesting? They will not work without a personal notes mail file. So if you move off mail and calendaring in the first phase and there is no personal mail file left for the user, then maybe specific applications already break, even if you still have the Notes client. Or a list of applications using fancy external code, file interfaces, whatever. Or from more project perspective, I give you a list of writers for specific applications, or the writers only, or the top writers, to get an idea who could be the owner if you don't know him. So that's all ideas or specific answers to specific questions in specific projects, which we could answer all with the information which is in our boxes. That leads me to the end and to the conclusion. Maybe I fire that slide up again. We had it already twice in this section. So this is change project from 3 perspectives. Don't let your users float around. So I think there is a proper change management and cultural project should be part of the whole step. We have been showing you ideas on measuring business value, usage, Orga, Deo, finding ways to get around technical hurdles on the client side, and gathering and interpreting information about the application usage and design. So I personally have a suggestion for you if you start such projects. At first, one should have a clear vision when starting such a migration project. And as said several times, the migration is not only a technical process to change platform. You should have a clear idea on how you want to use the new stack. If you're moving towards something, you have to have ideas why you're doing that. Not only to save money, how should I use the new modern functional stack? Which functionality to use to support which business use cases? So that's a matter of thinking, having a vision, strategy, and educating users, telling them what the idea would be. So a very simple example is, instead of storing of sending large emails around, we saw this nice picture from Stefan showing the distribution of mail sizes. Instead of sending these emails around, why not storing that stuff in a central place, sending around links? So that's more the modern way of collaboration. Or create open containers for a closed community, meaning you have a container and all the stuff in the container is for the community, which has access to the container, but don't mess around with item level security like we did in Notes, having reader fields and author fields all the time. One recommendation is use the strengths of the new platform instead of doing the stuff you did the past 20 years the Notes way on a new platform. That does make sense. And another recommendation, stay with your existing platform where it makes sense. So if you have heavy applications, which are real Notes applications, and it's hard to move them off from Notes, just run them on a Domino server. That's not a problem. So, and if you have these clear ideas, and that's a message from us, if you have these clear ideas, then panagenda tooling and services try helping answer your questions which arise from those clear ideas. That's my conclusion. And now time is open for question and answers.
Excellent. We are rapidly nearing an end of our allocated time, but there is two questions, one to each of you, which I will ask in the order that they were written. First to Stefan, could you tell us why geographic and departmental information is so important?
Well, the reason why it's important is just because of the fact that, for instance, to give you a simple example, identifying an application owner. So you see a lot of activity on a database and you have no clue who is really the owner of the application. Then department information or HR information can help you in identifying the owner. So for instance, if you see that 100 users are accessing this application and 80% of all those users are coming from the sales department, then you have a good indication that sales as a whole is somehow the owner of that application, right? Because they are heavily using it compared to all the other organizational structures. So this is, for instance, one use case from the department point of view. For geographical, it's pretty much the same, to identify country usage information to see how many users from different countries are utilizing different applications across my whole organizations, just to group them and to use this information then further on in this whole migration planning process is pretty much essential, and therefore we always say that HR and geographical information is important. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense. And the second question is to Henning. Does panagenda tooling offer a solution to migrate or adapt or even remediate code towards target platforms like SharePoint?
That's a nice question. And that's a question we always get. So to be very clear on that point, all our tools inspecting code inside Domino applications are made to analyze and to understand what's in the mix. So what sort of dependencies do I have? What sort of code is the application complex or not? We have patterns which we could find to say this is an application which is maybe more or less easy to migrate towards SharePoint, but we will never ever have automats who create code out of Notes code which works in SharePoint. So there is no code generator available from panagenda to generate SharePoint code out of Notes code. No, sorry.
Okay, hopefully that is the answer that the individual was hoping for. That's pretty much the end of the allocated time that we have for this webinar. If you want to have the second last word, Henning?
There is one more thing. Just I want to tell you, the audience, that as of today or last night, Application Insights version 1.5 is released. So maybe you take a look at that on our website. Most of the screenshots I had is from Application Insights version 1.5, and there is 2 upcoming webinars in this series. Are you getting the most value out of your IBM Connections environment, and why are you still paying for retired applications, coming up soon? That's something I wanted to tell you.
Exactly. The links to both of those, as well as the recording to this webinar, will be sent to all the registrants in the follow-up email, which you will receive tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to thank the speakers and thank the attendees, and wish everyone a good remaining day.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.